You're listening to episode 123 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Lorraine M. Hobbs joins us to speak about her experiences teaching mindfulness to teens and young adults. If you're listening to this podcast, it means you value the conversations that Present Moment offers with every episode. This is made available without advertising or marketing gimmicks, which is only possible with your financial support. Please take a moment now to pause the recording and visit presentmomentmindfulness.com and make your donation to ensure the website and podcast can continue to bring you the guests you're interested in hearing. Something new teachers of mindfulness encounter is that it's one of the most rewarding activities they can do, and it's also not as easy as it may seem. In addition to having a personal practice spanning decades, good teachers also spend years learning the nuances of mindfulness and presenting it to others. This can be even more complicated when the audience has particular needs, as when teaching mindfulness to younger people. Lorraine M. Hobbs is the director of the Youth and Family Programs at the University of California, San Diego Center for Mindfulness. During her tenure at the center, she has developed and implemented curricula in mindfulness for multiple age groups and a course in mindful and compassionate parenting, her adolescent certification program, and she also consults with educators on integrating mindfulness and compassion-based programs in schools and offers workshops and public talks in the community. Our guest today is Lorraine Hobbs. Lorraine, welcome to the podcast. So glad to have you here.
Thank you very much, Ted. I'm very happy to be here with you today.
So let's begin by having you tell us about your background. How did you first encounter mindfulness and how did that grow in your life?
It was about 16 years ago. I'm actually, my background is in family therapy, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But about 16 years ago, I was actually finishing up some training in homeopathic medicine, and a friend of mine invited me to come to a lecture at UCSD on mindfulness, and it took those 30 minutes to convince me that this was a path I wanted to follow. I practiced TM for a number of years, but this was the missing piece in terms of my meditation training. And I started coming to the center for a period of time. I approached Dr. Hickman and asked him to train me, which he did. And a few years later, I asked for permission to develop the Youth and Family Program Division, and he gave me full permission, which I embraced gladly, and the rest is history. We now have a very, I think, well-developed program in the Youth and Family Division area. We offer kids programs in mindfulness. We offer kids programs and teen programs in mindful self-compassion, and we have a mindful and compassionate parenting program. We also offer intensives, we offer retreats, we teach in the schools. So, yes, very excited to have been part of that whole development.
Wonderful. So let's dig into that development a bit. You've built some programming for teens and young adults.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you could tell about the germination of that, what it's based on, and how these programs that you work on have been growing.
So we've had programs at UCSD, Center for Mindfulness, for probably the last 10 to 12 years now. And in the beginning, there were not a lot of the now existing programs for youth, for teens. So it was very experimental. And I remember reaching out to Susan Kaiser Greenland, who was kind of one of the pioneers, one of the people who was kind of walking the path there, and offering through her book, offering a lot of opportunities for parents and their children, for professionals teaching children. And I remember reaching out to her one day saying, it's so hard to get programs going because a lot of people don't know what mindfulness is. And so I'll get a teen and I'll get a kid. So not sure what to do with all that. And she said, in the beginning, you take them all. And because mindfulness and self-compassion programs are not therapy, they're not any form of treatment, they're not an intervention, they really simply are an opportunity to begin cultivating awareness, right? Awareness of self, awareness in the self-compassion programs, awareness of any struggle, any conflict, any suffering, and learning to meet that with kindness and compassion. So in the beginning, my courses were very mixed. I had very young children, 8 and 9-year-olds with 18-year-olds. And it was a very difficult balance to strike, but I did it. And then it took time to figure out, well, what's an appropriate length of time for teens? I knew that the 2.5-hour program of MBSR wasn't going to work for teens. It's developmentally inappropriate. The length of the meditations, inappropriate for a teenage brain. So it really was through a lot of trial and error, but it was because of my background as a family therapist that I think that really helped me navigate the learning process, and kind of gave me the courage and the fortitude to say, look, this is how teens work, this is how families work. Let's just keep moving forward, keep taking these steps forward and seeing what works. And over time, my classes just really started filling up. And about 5 years ago, I came across MSC. Actually, I didn't just come across it. Dr. Hickman and Michelle Becker were two of the, pioneers, along with Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, the founders of the program, who were kind of experimenting with the whole teacher training process and the 8-week course versus the 5-day intensive. And of course, they brought it to UCSD Center for Mindfulness. So I had the opportunity to learn from some of the best. And I remember going to, trying to think, Hollyhock, Canada. It's wonderful. Do you know that place?
Oh, I just know the name Hollyhock.
Oh my goodness. It is an incredible place. I would recommend that anybody go there on retreat. It's kind of a retreat center on an island, and it's absolutely beautiful, but it's cold in the winter. So anyway, I went there for the 5-day intensive after taking the 8-week course and said to Kristen, look, I've worked with teens and families for 30 years, and I would love the opportunity to adapt this adult program for teens, because I've been adapting MBSR for teens for the last, I don't even know how many, 10 years at that point. And she said, absolutely, you've got all the qualifications we're looking for, to have someone adapt the program. And I don't know how I came across Karen Bluth, but she also had been given permission by Kristen to start adapting. And so we came together and have spent the last 5 years creating this program called Making Friends with Yourself, and it's an adaptation of the adult MSc program. And Ted, I cannot tell you how it's growing. It's growing at the interest in this program is growing at a phenomenal rate, in part because it's evidence-based. There's a lot of good research to demonstrate that self-compassion training is really what teens need. As a matter of fact, some research studies actually say that it's the self-compassion training that's driving outcome much more than mindfulness for teens. And it makes sense. Adolescence it's a robust period of growth, as we all know, but it's also fraught with so many challenges and changes in the brain, the whole physiology.
And especially in our contemporary society where depression rates for teens are higher, even than when you and I were teens, and I'm sure you also knew people who were encountering those kinds of difficulties, that today, with the level of distraction and things to be depressed about, seems to be at epidemic levels.
Mm-hmm. It's absolutely. The other very big concern, it's actually a growing concern on a national, but also on an international level, is kids at risk for suicide. Teen suicide rates are climbing at a phenomenal rate. And there are certain countries where the suicide rate is just at an all-time high. But here in the U.S., it's also growing at an alarming rate. And in Indiana, for example, they've had a rush of suicides in different counties. And, Indiana has the second highest rate of suicide in the country, and they're right behind Alaska. And, you ask the question, well, what are the variables that contribute? Well, of course, there's poverty, and there's a lot of peer pressure. There's a lot of anxiety with, what's happening in the world, environmental concerns, socio-political concerns. There's a growing concern that technology is really contributing to teens who are at risk for suicide or suicidal ideation. And along with some of the other socioeconomic and political and environmental concerns, what you have is teens who are now isolating, getting onto social media, and having that constant exposure to social media seems to be exacerbating how they feel about themselves, really challenging their self-esteem.
Yeah, instead of it being something that can be a nourishing tool, it becomes a demoralizing just way of encountering the world and being faced with a comparison, and an inevitable and understandable comparison between how one's own life trajectory may be going and what is shared with the glitz and glamour and Disney shine that is not reality.
It's not reality. And, that's one of the things I love about this program that Karen and I have created, Making Friends with Yourself, and some of the differences between our program and the adult program is that we really address the whole issue of self-esteem versus self-compassion. We address the issue of social comparison at a time when teens should be collaborating, cooperating, because they need one another's support. Adolescence is a time when you're preparing to leave home. You need your tribe, but our institutions and a lot of our cultural values say, no, we want you to compete to be the best. So we put them in positions where they are in competition, which creates more of a disconnection. So our program really, and I really appreciate this, helps them look at the role of the media and, some of the ways that they respond to all the pressures, the academic, the social, the peer, and the whole idea of you've got to be number one, you've got to measure up, and being average isn't good enough anymore.
Right.
So So the lovely thing is we help them look at who they are and maybe start and start accepting, that it's okay to be different. It's okay to be unique. It's okay to be who you are. Pema Chodron, I think it's Pema Chodron, says, there's a beautiful quote that says, we may die, we may go to our death feeling jealous, feeling anxious, feeling scared. So the whole idea of self-compassion is not to throw ourselves away and become something else. It's to turn toward who we are and accept. So the whole idea of our program is, how do we teach teens to tend and befriend all parts of themselves? Because that's where they struggle the most.
Sounds lovely. And it sounds like there's also been a great deal of deep listening to the experience of what younger folks are going through, that this is not just purely based on scientific research. Of course, that greatly informs it, but also areas of mental health and psychology on what the developing mind and heart needs at that point. So I'm curious what you've also found, what maybe some other interesting things have arisen for you as this program has undergone development, if there were any surprising shifts that were implemented with the program to address some things that may have come up.
It's interesting. I just came back today from Port Townsend. It's a community on the Puget Sound right outside of Seattle, about 2 hours actually. But it's a town of about 8,000 people. And this is my third time in a year and a half going to this small community to teach self-compassion to adults and to teens. And Ted, I cannot tell you how impressed I am by the person who is driving that whole project. Her name is Cynthia Osterman, and she has this program called the Benji Project. And her son Benji committed suicide 2 years ago, maybe almost 3 years ago. And what she decided to do was to create a project in his honor that would help foster well-being, mental health and well-being for other teens who may be struggling. So she's brought us, I just came back from this 4-day intensive working with 27 girls at the scout cabin. And it was really, really, really interesting. You've got teens, as we've been saying, adolescence is a time where there's so much confusion for teens. Not only are their brains going through or undergoing all this construction, but their bodies are changing too, and they don't know who they are. But yet the demands placed on them just create a lot of stress and a lot of pressure. So we had these 27 girls, many of whom who didn't want to be there, because most teens don't want to come to any kind of self-help program or something that's going to benefit them unless it's going to be fun and lots of activities and they're going to be with their friends and it's a social opportunity. But we just got the surveys back, and I think it's 85% of the girls said they would absolutely recommend this program to other teens.
Which is pretty rare for folks at that age to have a recommendation, right?
And these were, 11 to 15-year-olds. We had one 10-and-a-half-year-old, very bright, very creative, very talented young girls, but just so inspiring to hear their wisdom and their interest in looking at the challenges they face and maybe some of the the methods they've been using that haven't been that helpful, and the willingness to try on something new. So it's just every time this happens, I'm just incredibly honored to be delivering these programs to them. I can tell you another story that is just blew my mind. Coming back to your question about mental health and all the ways that this program can benefit teens. last year I offered a program in a very small community again, a town of about 11,000 in Ohio. And I had about, I want to say 18 kids in the class. And at the very end of the program, this boy comes up to me and he says, Mrs. Hobbs, he said, a month before this program started, and it's an 8-week program, so we'd been together for 2 months. He said, about a month before, he said, I came out and I announced to my family and to my community that I am gay. And he said, my family didn't understand. It's a small Midwestern community, didn't understand. And he said they blamed me and they shamed me, and I felt very ostracized from my family. And he said I was not only depressed, but I was actively suicidal. But his twin brother had brought him to the course. So they went through the course, and at the end of the 8 weeks, he came up to me and said, I am no longer suicidal. I have moments of depression. I have a lot of work to do, but I have found the tools I need to begin really accepting who I am versus wanting to throw myself away because I didn't feel like I fit in, or I didn't feel like I was enough, or whatever those beliefs were at the time. So, making friends with yourself, or any self-compassion training, has the capability, the capacity to help teens really develop resources that can become, part of their lives for the rest of their lives.
Mm-hmm. So you've shared some of the wonderful success stories of what this program has meant in touching the lives of younger practitioners who are probably new to contemplative practice. I'm wondering, what are some of the difficulties that you've run into just in developing the program, or in how you might share it with others if there's been resistance, if some people may not quite understand what it is that's happening? What are some hurdles that you've run across?
I think the biggest hurdle was, and continues to be, getting the word out. We offer our programs through the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. And so many of the adults who take the courses through there, or through the teachers who have trained through CMSC, or some of the teachers who are teacher trainers, that are certified teachers, they hear about our program and they're interested because they work with a teenage population, or they tell their friends or colleagues that there is a program offered for teens. So we're growing at a phenomenal rate now, but I think one of the biggest hurdles was helping people reach those professionals that work with teens. Because as I suggested just a moment ago, teens don't come seeking the course themselves. The adult mindful self-compassion courses, the adults refer themselves. They show up, they're ready to work. That's not the way it works with teens. As a matter of fact, another hurdle that we I think have been able to work with quite effectively is creating a family orientation session at the beginning of each course, where I personally work individually with each family, so I know who's coming in, so I can inform the parents, inform the teens, so I can work, and this is going to sound strange, but work a little magic in that room. And that magic really helps to break down some of the resistance. I think one way of saying it is that some of the interventions I do in that session help to realign the balance of power, and it helps to create a healthy connection with that teen, so that by the time the first class starts, they know me. They're already trusting me because they saw me working with the family. Mm-hmm. And it helps them work with the resistance in such a way that they get more out of the class. They're more available to work with the material.
So thank you for that overview, and I wanted to ask, you're working on something else you mentioned before we started today's interview. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share that with the listeners as well.
Sure. Um, so I have a few colleagues that I'm working with on other programs. Uh, one program is called A Friend in Me, and it's for a younger age group. It's for, I think, 8 to 11-year-olds, because the teen curriculum, just as we had to adapt from the adults to the teens, and we did that by integrating art activities and more movement activities, and really addressing the developmental appropriateness for this age group. We've had to do the same for a younger population. So the meditations are even shorter, and there's much more activity and exercises, but always, no matter the age group, always with the intention of bringing the experience into a felt sense of what mindfulness and self-compassion really are. Not keeping it at a cognitive level, although we have some things that address that, but really bringing it into a felt sense so that they really begin to understand and recognize the importance of, if these are my thoughts and my perception of my reality is this, how is that beginning to show up in my full experience? And then when I begin to recognize and understand that, then I have choices. It's in those moments that the mindfulness and self-compassion become more alive for kids, for teens, and for adults. So that's one project. We're creating a curriculum. Hopefully, this curriculum will be published and open to the general public, or available to the general public, within several months. And the other project is a book I'm writing with another colleague, and it really is based on the importance of teaching professionals how to teach self-compassion. So, you can pick up a workbook, you can go to a workshop, you can even do a teacher training in a curriculum. That does not make you an effective or successful teacher of self-compassion. So the book is really rooted in the fundamentals of embodiment, the fundamentals of having your own personal practice, because that's really where we teach from when we teach any of the mindfulness-based interventions. We teach from our own personal practice. And I think when we can help self-compassion teachers and mindfulness teachers as well really understand that, and this is always a challenge for therapists, because they want to get into the why. They ask the why questions, and they want to begin to excavate, and they don't always know when they're striving or moving into fixing mode. So this book is really going to help professionals, teachers, clinicians, really understand just the basic fundamentals of teaching self-compassion, which has to do with, I recognize, because I'm embodied, when I'm striving, when I'm moving into fixing mode, or when I'm uncomfortable with silence and I want to change the experience in some way. So the third area that we'll really focus on is the fact that we really try to, this book will hopefully help professionals really understand that all we're doing, the only real intention we have, is to teach children and teens, how to recognize when there's a struggle, and then teaching the tools for how to meet that suffering. In other words, most of us are so oriented toward moving away from our suffering, and we're simply going to help them navigate through curiosity and awareness. Oh, this is what's here now. Name it to tame it. Feel it to heal it. That whole idea that we can turn toward it, we can befriend it, And we do that by bringing self-compassion, asking a very basic question. What do you need? What do I need in this moment? What do I need to hear? What do I need in the way of a soothing gesture, something that activates the release of oxytocin? Teaching kids these tools it's like giving them a gold mine. They learn to care for themselves. They learn to befriend themselves.
Which is at the heart of teaching, is not facts and figures. It's how do you learn how to learn?
How do you learn how to learn? Yep, that's exactly it.
I also like the way you were characterizing early on in our discussion what Susan Kaiser Greenland's thoughts were on, although this may be therapeutic, we're not doing therapy. There's a difference there. And I really love this last bit that you were talking about with making sure teachers are properly equipped. And there's been some discussion about a recent paper that was indicating that teacher competency wasn't quite as heavy a factor as we may have thought. And of course, my my critical eye on that was leaving one thing. There was something missing from that, and that's these were beginning courses, and that's not the sum total of someone's engagement with mindfulness or self-compassion or whatever it may be introduced to. So you may not see some of the subtle but quite profound misdirections that may have inadvertently been caused by the fine nuance that is teaching of mindfulness and self-compassion and other things that are so critical to how one meets the world.
Yeah, that's very true. I think that one of the things that's really missing from, even though we talk about it in our teacher training, one of the things that's most difficult to grasp is an understanding of what affect tolerance really is. So when someone is in distress, here you're running a group with teens or adults, and someone's in distress, what do you do with that? And if you're not embodied, if you're not aware of your own experience and what's arising for you, you're either going to react to it and move on, or react to it and start excavating and trying to get to the why is this happening, versus loving connected presence, which is simply staying embodied, connecting. Sometimes all we have to do is put our hand on our heart, and people feel like they're being acknowledged, they're being seen, they're being heard. So there's so much value to the idea that people need teacher competency. You said it beautifully, to the idea that people need to be trained well. So at the very least, we do no harm.
Right, exactly.
And the last thing I wanted to mention is that I'm working with a psychiatrist in Germany. His name is Jörg Mangold, and we have been granted permission from the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion to take the Mindful Self-Compassion curriculum, which is what we adapted for the teens, and now adapted for parents. Because as a family trained therapist, I've worked with families for well over 35 years, and I don't see anyone as a single entity.
Right. They don't exist in a vacuum.
I don't exist in a vacuum. No man is entire of himself, right? Yeah. And so when you have that kind of training, you want to see the whole system and what's impacting this system. So it's great that we've got this program for teens, that hopefully they will take some of these tools on board, and they'll develop them as skills, and they'll take them into their lives. They still are connected to a family, to parents. And new research is showing that parents who have a practice in mindfulness and self-compassion have a reduction in depression and anxiety in their teens. And it just makes sense. If you think about the mirror neurons and empathic resonance and all those things that connect us, taking responsibility for how we walk into our homes every day, or how we connect with our children, or parent to parent every day, can really have an outcome in terms of well-being or additional stress.
Right, right. Having an awareness that although there are individual variabilities, and so there are no guarantees on this, an awareness of the entire ecosystem of someone's life,
Yes.
not just one aspect of it, is critical to the best chances of what might be successful in helping them with their sense of well-being.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And, I think helping every member of the family become more responsible for their personal well-being, which will contribute to the well-being of, as you said, the ecosystem. I love that because that also reflects the larger community and the needs of the larger community.
Lorraine, is there anything else you wanted to share with the listeners?
If you have children, I would highly recommend that you pick up a couple of books on mindfulness, and there are some new books out there on self-compassion for kids, for teens. I would highly encourage parents to take their interest in the topic to their schools. I was meeting with some leaders of a private school here in San Diego not too long ago, and the headmaster of the school actually asked me why there is such a rise in anxiety and depression in children. And he said they're actually partnering with a children's hospital here in town because they're seeing an increase, as we said earlier, Ted, they're seeing an increase in some of these internalizing disorders, and kids are more at risk for suicidal ideation. I don't know if we're just paying more attention or if there really is a significant increase in some of these areas, but they're taking it very seriously. And he asked me what I thought was going on. And in that whole conversation that we had, one of the things that stood out for me was this growing awareness that since 9/11, and I don't know if this is the sole reason, but I think since 9/11, there's been a growing anxiety in the idea that we're not as safe as we used to be, and our whole geopolitical.
I guess just the landscape of the world that we're in is no longer quite as isolated, and the impression of safety is not what it may have once been.
Yes.
Go through things like the Cuban Missile Crisis or this or that, but they had an end, and this doesn't seem to have had quite as clean a break. It seems that planted some seeds.
I think it did, and I think that you hear in conversations around the city, the face of the enemy has changed, but I don't think it's just one specific kind of face. I think it's on multiple levels. We're being challenged in ways that we never have before, and I don't know that adults are coping with their stress in ways that are most beneficial to the family members. And so I think children are not only getting added stress, coming back around to the whole issue of all the pressure that they're under and pressures that they feel, but if parents aren't coping with their own stress, then that's going to impact how children. I mean, a lot of kids show up to school every day already under a barrage of stress and stressors, and they're not coping well by the time they get to school in the morning. So I think we have a job to do, and I would highly encourage parents to take an active role in seeing that their schools and their children and the children at the schools that their children are part of, their communities, start talking about some of these issues. I'd love to see that happen.
Thank you, Lorraine. For those who are interested, I'll be providing a couple of links on the episode page for this episode. Our guest today, Lorraine Hobbs. Lorraine, thank you so much for joining. I hope you'll come back when your book is published and we can chat some more.
Thank you so much, Ted. I've really enjoyed this time with you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.